Welcome to the Restorative Nourishment Podcast, where we take a deep dive into specific health and nutrition topics with leading experts so you can have the tools and knowledge to take charge of your life and restore your health. Welcome back to the Restorative Nourishment Podcast. I'm Allie. And today I have my special guest, my friend Magdalena Wszelaki on, and today we're going to be talking about estrogen dominance. Magdalena is the founder of Welina, a clean line of supplements and USDA organic skincare, and creator of the popular Hormone Balance community. She's written 2 books on balancing hormones naturally through nutritious food, targeted supplements, and supportive herbs in her popular book, Cooking for Hormone Balance, published by HarperCollins, and Overcoming Estrogen Dominance. In addition to a celebrated author, Magdalena is an entrepreneur, holistic nutrition coach, chef, certified herbalist, and speaker serving tens of thousands of women who struggle with issues related to estrogen dominance. Welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me and asking me to talk about this topic that no one seems to know what estrogen dominance is, and almost every woman has it. So I'm really happy to do this, Ellie.
Thank you. Yeah, so let's get in maybe to a little bit of your story and why you came to this, and then what is estrogen dominance?
Yeah, so, I think the most pivotal moment was in 2008 when I was living in Hong Kong, Shanghai, between Hong Kong and Shanghai. I was in a high-flying job position working for an advertising agency in a regional job, so I was traveling a lot. And at about 2006, 2007, I really didn't feel like I was feeling like myself. And I was really, really lucky to be diagnosed in 2008 really quickly with having Hashimoto's disease. And my doctor was super progressive. She did the antibodies. She's like, you've got Hashimoto's, it's an autoimmune disease. What I didn't know back then, I also had definitely adrenal deficiency from just being completely exhausted, doing half marathons, doing adventure sports, working very late hours. Like, if you have seen Mad Men, the series, like, it's just set in the 1950s, but that's how advertising life is. It's exciting, it's exhilarating. But it's also taking you on the road a lot. And I was in a regional job. So I was living between Hong Kong and Shanghai, but I was in Taiwan and Singapore and all around. And not surprisingly, in 2008, I felt like my health really fell apart. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and I most certainly had estrogen dominance. Back then, it's just, something that we don't diagnose correctly. They don't even ask you these sort of questions. And that's what made me, I think, ask the big question, like, why is my own body producing these antibodies to kill an organ, a gland in my own body, right? Like, what did I do that is confusing the body so much? Is that just conceptually, even though I knew nothing about nutrition, didn't sound right to me? So fast forward a few years later, I ended up moving to the United States, quit my job in advertising, went to nutrition school, and always been very passionate about food. And, one of the cool things about growing up in Southeast Asia, because my dad was a diplomat, so we landed in Malaysia, a tropical country, when I was age 15. And I lived there for 17 years. And then only after that, I moved to Hong Kong and Shanghai. So, in total, I lived for 22 years in Asia. And one of the cool things about that is there's a very blurred line between food and medicine. Where food is, where food ends, and medicine begins. When you make a soup, you put certain things in there, and you find the same thing in herbal stores when you go to, like traditional Chinese stores.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I've carried forward with me for a very long time. Like, whenever I make, say a salad, I always look at the herbs that I'm putting in, and it's like, oh, what can this herb do for me, right? From a medicinal perspective, not just culinarily. So this is how, I ended up setting up my business 15 years ago, it's going to be now. And I never looked back. And, like you said, I published 2 cookbooks. And then it was just my big passion to apply same what you're doing, except like, I think I'm a little bit like more focused on like, let's talk about estrogen dominance. What can we do to overcome it, right? And then Cooking for Hormone Balance goes into 7 different hormonal imbalances, like going through PCOS, thyroid, Hashimoto's, menopause, and adrenal deficiency and so on and so forth. So it goes by conditions and then aligns the recipes with it. But my whole journey with estrogen dominance started when I was in my late 20s. I remember my life was going really well. I was dating this really cool guy. And then I still remember this, I was beginning to travel internationally, and I was just really proud of myself. I was getting a lot of validation from my work, right? And I remember sitting in the car and holding my hand like this. My hands were like that. And I suddenly felt this lump on my breast. And I was like, man, and there was no Google back then. And then just my life fell apart, And then I remember going to a doctor and then just being scared that right away that you're going to do the mammogram. If you don't do it, there's going to be consequences, right? And so looking for the diagnostic tools and then waiting for the results and all that. I remember that is like something that was so imprinted in my head. And then I started realizing that from a family perspective, we have estrogen problems on both sides of the family, right? So I have aunts who passed away from all the various different estrogenic cancers. And so hopefully we get to talk about the symptoms and then I can mention what they are. But basically, so just heads up, things like uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancers, even thyroid cancers, interestingly, are mostly estrogenic. Prostate cancers in men are estrogenic cancers too. And so in both sides of the family were evenly distributed in that way. There was a major cause of death amongst women. And so not surprisingly, as I started discovering more about hormones, I'm like, man, I'm having these, horrible periods. So much so when I say horrible periods, like I had to skip school. And because I was on the floor, fetal position, doing 2 types of painkillers, right? And I was a good student. So I was never using that as an excuse not to go to school. And then later when I was working, I had to take a day or 2 off. The mood swings were horrendous, right? The tenderness of breast, then finding those lumps later on. Also just having like melasma, like the browning of the face on the sides here and discoloration above here. I remember there was a guy I was dating at one point, and he said to me, from far, you look like as you had a mustache. You don't say things like that to a girl, I didn't know about, that all of that was highly estrogenic. And as I started doing this work and committed to quitting my job in advertising and transitioning to doing this kind of work, estrogen dominance became really clear to me that almost every single girlfriend had it in some different ways, and no one talks about it. And then we assume that it's completely normal to be so estrogenic in so many ways. And so that's what got me to doing this work, because I'm like, this is not okay. It's not okay that 70% of women have it in different, symptoms might be different from mine, but only about 10% of women actually know that this is estrogen dominance. And majority of them don't even know what to do, even when they're diagnosed. So I thought, I need to do something about that.
Right, because once it gets really bad, then you see what the issues are. But when it's just hovering sort of at a lower level, it's, undiagnosed. It's not even in awareness. So this is amazing that you're bringing all of this front and center, and hopefully this podcast can help also bring more awareness. I guess, what are the symptoms that most women see and the age range, I suppose, that we start seeing it in women?
Yeah. So here's the tricky thing about estrogen dominance is that it can start off as early as the girl having her first period. That is a nightmare, right? And then, I'm 51 right now. I'm going through I'm towards the tail of perimenopause. And and I'm going to show you a chart in a second why I say it's highly problematic in menopause, in perimenopause and menopause as well. And women experience estrogen dominance, even though it makes completely no sense. You go like, wait a second, I'm in menopause. Estrogen is dropping. I really should not be having estrogen dominance. That makes no sense. In fact, that's one of the top emails that we get from people saying your quiz is total nonsense because I'm going through menopause and it's telling me I've got estrogen dominance. So it can happen as early as age 15. And those symptoms in the young ages can be anything to do with problematic periods. So you know how anything to do with PMS, having very heavy periods or scanty periods, or having mid-cycle spotting, and the thing is, like, let's talk about PMS here for a second, right? Like, we are conditioned to assume that is part of being a girl, being a woman later on. And it's normal that for some women, it's so debilitating, right? Just the way it was for me. And I was told, that's what my mom told me. That's what the doctors told me, like it was normal. And let me assure you that when you take control of your health and you are metabolizing estrogen correctly, you can actually not have these symptoms. And you can go through, you obviously are going to go through, when you're still cycling, you are definitely going to be feeling, the surge of estrogen, right? When it gives you a lot more confidence, you're much more open. And then before your period, everything. I mean, just look at the chart of periods, right? Of your hormones during a period or during a menstrual cycle. It's just up and down, right? So it's normal to feel certain emotions around that time, but not to a point of being, having to be dependent on painkillers and destroy your relationships because of your mood swings and having headaches so debilitating and you can't function. So those are some of the classical examples. But then it can go into things like fibroids, ovarian polyps, also thyroid nodules. I mentioned thyroid cancer, but also thyroid nodules are highly estrogenic. And guess what? I've had them my whole life until about 7-8 years ago. My thyroid is completely clear now. I do an ultrasound every 1 or 2 years. But that's one of the symptoms too. Women who tend to distribute a lot of weight around your hips and thighs, where your buttocks, right? You exercise a lot, you're eating clean, or you're trying to, but yet there's always that flappy, it's either fat or cellulite concentrating around there. That's highly estrogenic as well. And then you're going into the cancers, right? So I mentioned ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, breast cancer, in non-smokers, lung cancer in non-smokers can be largely due to estrogen dominance, thyroid cancer, and prostate cancer in men. And then when you women go into, more, let's say, later parts of their lives, we see things like definitely a lot of mood swings. You start experiencing even hot flashes can be correlated with estrogen dominance. Those migraines, especially if you can plot your migraine connected to a specific time of a cycle, it's really interesting to see that is, you can plot it and be like, oh, every time I'm ovulating, I'm having a really bad headache, or I'm close to my period. The day before, I have to shut everything down in the house and darken everything because I've got such a migraine, or just headaches. That can also be due to estrogen dominance. So those are some of the, I would say, bigger ones. More like on the surface, it will be varicose veins on your face. Let me not forget about breast health, because that's actually a big one. So anything to do with finding a lump, having lumps. So every woman has lumpy breasts. Let's just establish that. And so when you touch your breast on a regular basis, you know your baseline, right? And then suddenly you find something like the pea size something, right? That's definitely irregular. And a lot of women will find that those, whether it's a cyst, right? Or like a true lump, that is, but also having fibrocystic breasts, like women who go from cup A to cup C in the course of 2-3 days because of hormonal changes that affect the breast, can also definitely, that is very much estrogen dominance driven. Let me also not forget that things like endometriosis, which is so common amongst women who are still cycling, is one of the most painful conditions to experience. And endometriosis got two components: the autoimmune component, and then you also have, but it's also largely driven, the growth of the endometrial tissue is largely driven by estrogen, and it's got estrogen receptors. So, that's another thing. So as you can see, you tell me, who do you know in your life, Ali, who does not have estrogen dominance?
It's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
lot of symptoms. It's interesting. I have never had a period cramp in my life before. I
think
don't
you're
know
in
how
a
to
0.1% of the population.
Yeah, period cramps or headaches. I haven't experienced that. Yeah, probably in a very small percentage.
Would you mind if I shared that screen
Yeah, let's do that.
about the period? Because I want to
Mhm.
cover something that is very confusing for a lot of women, and I want to show you. This is a chart that shows your fluctuation or the decline of estrogen progesterone over the course of years, right? So as you can see, when we are in our 20s here, the estrogen to progesterone ratio is somewhat balanced out. It's not exactly 1-to-1, because this is more of conceptual representation of the hormones rather than actual numerical. But the idea is that you have a balance between estrogen and progesterone. And so as you can see, as we're going into like our, the 50s, actually, it already starts changing when you're 45. Now, look at what happens when your woman is 45, right? And then going into 50 and 55 and so on, right? If this is already like 55, most women will be already in menopause, postmenopausal, right? So period is over, like, and then you're like, why do I have estrogen dominance? This is one of the ways you can have estrogen dominance. Look how much more estrogen there is compared to progesterone. Mm-hmm. And then so estrogen dominance can happen in two ways. The first one is that the ratio of estrogen to progesterone is unfavorable. And one of the first hormones that starts dropping as you enter perimenopause is progesterone. So there's just insufficient progesterone to oppose that estrogen. And that's one of the reasons why you can become estrogen dominant. And so I hope this chart explains here for people who say that, it's hard for them to understand and grasp the concept, right? Just look at how much more estrogen, for example, a woman who is 55 has as compared to progesterone. So there's so much less to oppose it. And as with a lot of things with hormones, more or less is not better, right? Balance is key. So that's the first way you can experience it.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the ways that people can balance estrogen. And I think we can go into the microbiome, because what happens, and this is, everything needs to start in the gut, right? When we start rebalancing the gut, everything else shifts in life. And when we have an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria, we can also reabsorb a lot more estrogen. So let's get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me to answer that question, let me just step back and just finish the thought on how estrogen dominance happens. So we mentioned one, the estrogen to progesterone ratio. Mm-hmm. And that's important to know, because when you say, how do I correct estrogen dominance, right? Then, one of the ways, if that's a type of estrogen dominance, I call it type 1 estrogen dominance you have, then maybe getting on like bioidentical progesterone or using things like Vitex could be a really great solution. Now, type 2 estrogen dominance, which a lot of women have, and that's when nutritional interventions can be incredibly helpful, including gut health. When the estrogen in the body gets broken down to what I call clean and dirty estrogens, okay? Mm-hmm. And the dirty estrogens are the ones that are highly problematic. It's a little bit like, think of it like you're standing at a river and there is a bank in the middle of the river, and the bank is like a filter, and then the river goes into like a clean stream and a dirty stream, right? And so the question is, what's that bank in your body, right, that can separate those estrogens to clean and dirty ones? And by the way, we poop them out, right? Mm-hmm. That's how the metabolism of estrogen happens. And the answer is that part of the metabolism of estrogen happens in the gut. So that's what we're going to talk about, repairing your gut. And then the other half is, it's not exactly half, and the other part of estrogen gets metabolized in the liver. So having liver health and supporting your liver through various different nutritional or herbal protocols can be incredibly helpful in that way. So you asked about the gut. I still feel like it's a very underdeveloped industry and science behind it. But what we do know that there is something called the estrobolome. The estrobolome, as the name implies, is estro, so estrogen, and bolome as the microbiome, right? And the microbiome, there's specific subset of bacteria that codes for enzymes to help break those estrogens down and skew them towards the clean estrogens and away from the dirty estrogens that cause a lot of the symptoms that's in the body. And I want to do one quick interjection here as well. A lot of women think that estrogen is bad, right? Because estrogen causes breast cancer, and estrogen is the estrogen dominance is bad. So estrogen is bad if estrogen dominance is bad, right? Well, here's the thing. You would not be sitting here straight, listening and processing this interview here if you did not have estrogen, okay? Like we talked about that. You're going to be like squivel little old lady, fragile, with brain that is like completely mush if you had no estrogen. So let's not demonize estrogen. That's really important to understand, right? So it's the breaking down of the estrogen that matters a lot. And you can be, let me also qualify this. If you're going through perimenopause the way I am, or you are even in postmenopausal already, that metabolism of those estrogens, even though you are low, remember the chart I was showing, like you were low on estrogen there, it still matters. Because even though the estrogen is low, your body, you still your body's still dependent on the quality of your microbiome and your liver in metabolizing those things. In fact, I will argue that having a well-functioning gut microbiome and liver later in life is even more important, because if you think about it, who is the highest candidate for breast cancer? It's women after 60.
Mm-hmm.
Those women are low on estrogen. And because of the way we metabolize that estrogen and the chemical load from outside, right, all the chemicals that we are bathing in on a daily basis, which is preventable, avoidable. So I don't want to be sounding like a gloom and doom here. So back to the microbiome, yes, there is subset of bacteria. What we also do know is, like, for example, if you take breast cancer patients, science research shows that the diversity of the microbiome of that bacteria is a lot less. There's a lot less diversity amongst breast cancer patients who have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer as compared to women who do not have breast cancer, right? Which is another interesting factoid.
Very interesting.
And so a lot of times we get questions, so what's the one strain that I need? What's the one probiotic I need? And the answer is that it's more of the question of diversity and populating your microbiome with prebiotics that can come from amazing foods. And Ali has got all the recipes for that too in her cookbooks. It's about rotating the different fermented foods. Yes, rotating even your probiotics. That's part of the reason why we don't sell probiotic in our stores, because I am a big advocate of, like, you've got to rotate them. Like, get from one brand, get another one next time you run out, and rotate them. So that's what's really, fascinating. And the other component is your liver health. And I'll be, if you want, we can talk about some of the foods for liver health as well. That can be a great adjunct.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into that in a little bit. So diversity in the gut microbiome. Let's talk a little bit about how the pathogenic bacteria can shunt that to the more dirty estrogen. Share a little bit more detail about that.
And when we say pathogenic bacteria, it's not just bacteria, right? It's also yeast.
Yeah.
Like when you have things like candida, for example, that is a big contributing factor to this. For those of you who, one of the questions we get is like, how do I know that I have too many dirty estrogens, right? So there's a couple of things you can, for example, test it through things like, I like the Dutch test, DUTCH. It's a urine test. By the way, it's blood tests that show estrogen, do not show any estrogen metabolism. When I used to be in private practice, women will walk in with all these lab work, that was showing perfect estrogen, perfect hormonal health, and yet she's got fibroids and she's got nodules and her boobs are engorged 3 weeks out of a month, right? Like very, very estrogen dominant. So blood is not the way to do it. What I like about the Dutch test is it shows you the 2, 4, and 16 metabolites. And so those are the clean and dirty estrogens, and it shows you how you're breaking them down. One of the things that we know is that when you do have too much yeast, when you have too much of pathogenic bacteria, which again, you can do a lot of different gut testing, that just really shows you how well you're breaking them down. There's another really great test for glucuronation, how the glucuronation pathway is, there's a few pathway that is responsible for metabolism of estrogen. The glucuronation pathway is one of the big ones, and it's often overlooked. And that's one of the pathways that just really is struggling when you have a lot of pathogenic bacteria in your gut and you have yeast candida infections.
Okay, so we covered gut health and what estrogen dominance is, the symptoms, the age range. This has been fascinating. Let's talk about diet and liver health. Liver health first, and then let's go into diet for balancing estrogen.
Yeah. So, let's maybe approach it from 3 angles. One is food, herbs, and then pooping. So from food, my favorite foods for supporting the liver is the cruciferous vegetables. And so those are the brassica family, the cabbage family, right? So your cauliflowers, collard greens, arugula, my personal favorite, all the mustard greens, all the radishes. And if you don't like radishes, one of the great ways is to bake them, and they just like really these nice sugars come out, and it's just such a wonderful way of incorporating them into your diet without the pungent. They can be pretty pungent and difficult to consume.
I've had
You
an
do?
addiction to radishes since I've been like 2 years old. My mom said I would pull them off the grocery store shelf when she'd be shopping with me, and I would eat them. So I will eat a bunch of radishes at a time, a couple times a week. Like I have an
Wow.
addiction. I have an addiction to radishes.
Wow.
Mhm.
That
It's
is
really
quite
funny.
something.
It's like one of those things. Like anytime I'm out of balance, oh, I'll eat a bunch of radishes, and
No
everything
wonder
feels
your periods have been so eventful,
maybe
Ali.
that's why I've been eating radishes. This happened too, right? It's funny.
Broccoli sprouts are
Mhm.
one of the substances that are very high in sulforaphane.
Mhm.
You might have come, for those of you, especially who you've dealt with breast cancer before, you have a breast cancer family in your family. Sulforaphane is one amazing substance that helps to metabolize estrogen in a great way. And it supports the immune system to fighting cancer, blah, blah, blah. So there's
Mhm.
incredible research behind
Yeah.
it. So broccoli sprouts, I would say, like, if you're dealing with breast cancer, actually putting like a cup a day into a smoothie is just a wonderful. You don't want to cook it. That's the only thing. You don't want to put any heat through it.
Mhm.
So that's all the cruciferous vegetables are just so not only nutrient dense, so much more nutrient dense as compared to. I'm sorry to say, but like lettuces, I am not a fan. Ali, you and I did not talk about this before, so I don't know whether I'm like stepping on your toes here. With it's just my personal opinion. It's just like by weight, lettuces really don't bring much to the table, and I'd rather say to you get like mustard greens or arugula, which is so much more nutritionally dense as compared to doing a lettuce. So
We eat a lot of arugula and cabbage slaw. My kids love cabbage slaw, so I will thinly slice cabbage all the time, and they
oh
love
wow,
arugula too. So I personally like arugula better than lettuce, so we do that a
right,
lot.
yeah,
But the thing I'd like to mention here is that, when we cook cruciferous vegetables, we lose a lot of those nutrients that we need to metabolize the estrogen. So I think, but you can have a raw cruciferous vegetable with a cooked. So if you like roast your broccoli and you have a little arugula salad, you can get the benefits of it all.
exactly. And one other thing I want to also address about cruciferous vegetables before you get like 100 emails about, oh, but they're gonna kill my thyroid,
Mhm.
because
I
there's a
already
fear
get
about
100 emails about that anyway, so
that.
we
Okay,
can talk, let's talk about it.
so I just wanna put it out there that this is not going to kill your thyroid. Okay, in
Mhm.
fact, I have never seen anyone who got off all the cruciferous vegetables, which you're depriving yourself a lot of great nutrients, and who said, I have officially put my Hashimoto's and my low thyroid into remission just by getting off all that. It doesn't work. So
Mhm.
that way. So I just want to put it out there. So that's definitely my favorite from an herbal perspective. Like as an herbalist, there's some herbs that have an incredible affinity to really create a lot of movement, helping to create bile and and movement in the liver. And so things like burdock root, dandelion root, right? You can easily make a tea out of that. If you just go to a grocery store and find like a tea bags for like liver support, they're wonderful things to have before or after a meal, right? Artichoke.
I have a recipe on my membership site on nourishingmeals.com for a detox tea. And really, it's so easy. All you do is simmer burdock root and dandelion root, and you can throw in some ginger and you make a decoction, cover it, simmer it for 30 minutes, and then
Yeah,
you can throw in your dried herbs after that. And it's really lovely. And I mean, if you want to add a little honey or a little like non-dairy milk, you can, but it's so good just the way it is. So I think the more bitter foods people can incorporate into their diet, the
that's it.
better. Yeah.
You nailed it. Liver loves bitters, right?
Mhm.
So absolutely. And then it's
Yeah.
I actually love making my concoctions because I just have too many things going on, and I don't actually like to spend too much time in the kitchen. So even though I write cookbooks, and so but I also like simplicity. So one of my go-to methods is to use an instant pot for like literally a 10-minute setting for the concoction, and then I don't have to babysit the pot on the
That's a good idea. I haven't done that. I'm gonna have to try that.
yeah,
So
and
just you make your tea in the Instant Pot.
yes, but only for like the roots
The
and
root, yeah,
barks
yeah,
and
yeah.
berries, not
Right,
for like dry leaves. Yeah.
right, of course, yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So also my other favorite for liver support is Schizandra. So that's a
Mhm.
berry from Siberia, and it also helps to balance your immune system. I don't like saying the boosting because if you have an autoimmune disease, like you don't want to be particularly
Right.
over.
Yeah.
But it's just balance. It's and it gives you like this incredible energy. So those are just some really simple things to do. And then the last thing I want to say about liver health is that it's very, very underestimated, is that pooping is going to be key. If you are having chronic constipation, do whatever it takes. And because what happens is when you're not pooping, all the toxins are being recycled, and including estrogen. So you talk about estrogen dominance, like you're doing all the great things, but you're not pooping, including like people spend so much money on supplements and then you're not pooping, you're recycling all of that. It's going to be always taxing your body with those dirty estrogens. A couple of pointers, a lot of people go like, oh, I know I can do, say, magnesium at night. And sure, I mean, if that helps you, then do it. But I think a couple of things that are highly underestimated is food sensitivity. So things like, for example, dairy can constipate a lot of people. Gluten can constipate people. Figuring out when you do the elimination diet, which I know, Ellie, like you guys have amazing resources on that, like how to do it. It might help you with your pooping. But in the meantime, while you're figuring it out, just taking some magnesium citrate, for example, at night, starting off with 300 milligrams, maybe go up to 600, maybe more, just to make sure that even if it's assisted for the time being, it's better to take some vitamin C and poop rather than not do anything, right? So I would say those are the big things about your liver. One other thing I just want to mention, because that's a lot of women have like an aha moment about this. For those of you who had gallbladder removed, if you do a timeline of your health, you might notice that from the time the gallbladder was removed, not only have you encountered a lot more digestive issues, but also you may realize that, think about like, did some of the symptoms of estrogen dominance come on like 3, 6 months, 8 months after your gallbladder removal? And the reason why I ask this is because that's a very common issue in our community, where women go like, oh my God, that's where all my health issues started. And the reason is that a gallbladder stores your bile, right? And a lot of people know that bile is necessary for emulsification of fat, so that you can eat fatty foods and enjoy them and not get like a bloat. But what they don't realize also, that the bile is also critical in binding up those dirty estrogens. Okay, so when you don't have it, then the availability of the bile is significantly lower, because your liver is still producing the bile, but there isn't like this little sac to hold it and make it available whenever you're eating something on a regular basis. So it's just a lot less available. And doctors don't tell you that when you have your gallbladder removed, it's like, hey, by the way, maybe you should supplement a little with some ox bile, and support and get some assistance that way.
Right. I was just going to mention that. I usually have clients take ox bile when they've had their gallbladder removed. And really, to throw this out there, question whether or not you need your gallbladder removed before it ever
That's
gets
another
removed.
story. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. The other thing to mention about digestive health and moving your bowels is hydration. And so many people are not drinking enough water. And that is the absolute first step, is just to make sure you're drinking enough purified water.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about diet strategies, because you have these wonderful cookbooks and these wonderful books. And what diet strategies do you like to employ to help women balance estrogen?
Yeah, so I think we are very much aligned in that way, that I'm a strong believer that getting on the elimination diet is really sound. If somebody is having a challenge to do all the way and cutting out all the food culprits, then at least getting off dairy and gluten could be a really first starting point. I have found that to be one of the most transformative tools that one can do. While you're figuring out your health, and you're just lowering the inflammation so quickly, enabling your body, just creating this environment for your body to really be able to start healing, and estrogen dominance is no different, right? It's like there is this, your liver is struggling, your digestion is struggling, right? And so it's indirectly, but also directly, it's going to actually help a lot. So I'm a big proponent of doing the elimination diet. In fact, all my cookbooks are free of gluten, are free of dairy. I don't even use eggs because I found that about half the population are having a problem with eggs. And people go like, yeah, but I have my own eggs. Yeah, you don't know until you cut it out for, I think 4 to 6 weeks, and then reintroduce it, and your body's going to tell you whether it's your friend or foe. So I'm definitely a big proponent of that. And having said that, I also want to, it's when you do the elimination diet as a foundation. Like I use a triangle, like a healing triangle, with my books to explain this. And the bottom is the diet, right? And doing the elimination diet. And then as you progress, it goes into herbs and it goes into supplements, and then right on top is your prescription stuff. There's time and place for prescriptions, there's no doubt about that, but it's not your first go-to, right? Shouldn't be, at least. So doing the elimination diet and cutting out those culprits can be so transformative. I cannot tell you. This is like when you don't take care of that, but you go straight into supplements. And I will tell you, Ellie, that's one of the things that, even though I'm a supplement maker and I formulate supplements and I'm an herbalist, and it's probably bad for my business to say this, but also I also operate from a place of integrity, is that we always tell people, like, get the cookbook first and cook first and then get the supplements. Because when you're so inflamed and we buy these supplements and we spend so much money on them, and people go like, yeah, but they're not working. And then the question is, it's not even fair of your body to expect your body to do all this magic using the supplements when you're so inflamed from the food you're consuming. So I just want to appeal to everyone to kind of retract your own thought process on this. And then the other thing I just want to say about supplements is that, we grew up in a community society, which is nobody's fault. There is always a pill for something, right? You don't want to get pregnant, you take this. You got a headache, you take that. Da, 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 da. And now we are just kind of like, now you want to go natural. So people flip the model of going, well, what's the one supplement that I can take? I'm going natural, right? And so just be cognizant of your own thinking process in that way. And sometimes supplements can help in tandem when you do it with diet, but it's really the lowering the inflammation in the body is really going to make the biggest change you can imagine for yourself. I also want to add, Ellie, that I had problems with like dairy, eggs, and gluten most of my life. And in fact, I used to be covered in eczema, all over as a young kid. And my mom didn't know that was because of eggs. And then later, these food sensitivities transformed into other symptoms. I used to be covered in acne, had horrible migraines, my hair was falling out. And then I discovered it was those three things. I cut them out. And the interesting thing is that when you, this is, I want to give people like a little bit of hope here. Because I know, especially giving up your cheese is such a big thing. You're like, oh my God, not my cheese. And I get that, because that thing works on the same receptors as heroin. Can I just say that? Your mac and cheese is your comfort food, right? Not a bowl of peas, right? And you know why. And when I used to work in advertising, we used to run those TV campaigns and media buying for the ice cream company, right? And it was always at night. It was always the night. At night, they have figured out that it's at night it sells the best. You know why? Because you have this single woman in front of a TV with a bowl of ice cream, frustrated with life, just really feeling very lonely and very unhappy with her life. And that's the only source of consolation or any kind of joy, right? It was coming from that ice cream. So dairy works on it's the same receptors as literally as heroin does. It's a numbing mechanism. So just be cognizant of that. But the good news is that after a while, when you get off these foods and you let your body heal, you let your gut recover, elimination of things, and also adding all the nutrient high foods and all the things that Ali teaches about, right? And fermented foods and so on and so forth. Maybe with some supplementation, maybe you need to go deeper and need to look into parasites and other infections that are inhibiting your full healing. But once you do, I want to give you the good news here. And the good news is that most likely you'll be able to bring those foods in, maybe not on a full scale, but it's sort of like a bike lane. Not on the mainstream, on the high street, right? But maybe as a bike lane, once in a while, you have some cheese and you're going to be okay. I can have up to 4 eggs a week, and I'm totally fine. If I go beyond that, pop, headache, right? Yeah. All of that. So, yeah.
So diet is key. And I think that's where any kind of health condition, anything you have going on to restore nourishment, that is the foundation of the pyramid, is to shift your diet and to take out the foods that might be causing an immune response. So you said, whole foods diet, nutrient dense foods, fermented foods, remove gluten and dairy. Are there any other foods you recommend removing, or you just start there with gluten-free, dairy-free whole foods?
Yeah, I do recommend to get off eggs as well, because I feel like so many people are having a problem with eggs without realizing it, because it's like the perfect protein, right? We were told.
Yeah.
But also, I do remove soy and corn out of the. So my cookbooks are all free out of those five. Um, and the rest of it is like, I encourage people to keep a journal and kind of see what are you having potential reactions to, right? Like every time you have a beef stew and you're just like burping and you can smell that beef, maybe that's beef as a problem, right? I've had clients who had strawberry issues, maybe because of the histamine issue, who knows?
Mhm.
So yeah, but I would say those five, those are the big ones that I've identified as being highly problematic for people.
And then what about sugar? I think that's another big one for people. Yeah,
Yeah,
me.
so I don't cut out sugar completely, but definitely, I'm a big proponent of no more than 20 grams of sugar a day. So it's only 5 teaspoons, and it not just added, but even in the food that you're eating. So the number two reason why we get hate mail is when I say, or in social media, people will be like, I am unfriending you, I'm unfollowing you. Like, okay, is when I start saying that just observe the amount of fruit that you're consuming, because this can add up really quickly.
Mhm.
You put a banana in your smoothie in the morning, right? Which you shouldn't be even starting with sugar first thing in the morning, by the way. So, like, all my recipes in my cookbooks I'm a big savory proponent of
Mhm.
savory breakfasts.
So protein, fat in the morning.
Protein, fat, fiber,
Mhm.
yeah, and then, so let's say you're putting a banana in, you're having some snack that's also fruit, right? And count all of this, right? And then the next thing you know, it's like it all adds up to 40-50 grams of sugar. And especially when you're going into perimenopause and menopause, our response to sugar completely changes. It's not the same. Like, you could eat ice cream in your 20s and we'll be like, woohoo, I still look gorgeous in that bikini, right? Try to do this now over summer and eat like ice cream every day and take a photo of yourself a month later and see what you look like. I mean, you're going to put on 10 pounds, ugly pounds that are, the pounds that you don't want to carry, right? It's not the pounds from like strength training and being strong and
Mhm.
muscular woman, but it's like the pounds that are just the floppy, cellulite that all women hate. And that's all coming from sugar. So, I'm and especially I think in America is a difficult subject, because I think most Americans don't realize how desensitized they are to sugar. As a foreigner who moved to this country 15 years ago, I remember like going and having a cocktail, or having, buying a store ketchup or soup from a store, right? And I'm like, even Polish kielbasa has sugar. Like, and I'm on Polish origin, right? So I'm like, you don't put sugar in your kielbasa.
Mhm.
Why is there sugar in your bread? And people don't realize this. And then, when I used to run like cooking workshop, and we will just reduce the amount of sugar, people go like, but it's not sweet enough for me. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
because you're addicted to sugar. And so one thing I just want to encourage folks to, since we were talking about sugar, which is a highly, highly addictive substance. If you're having a lot of resistance around what I'm saying, you don't have to agree with me. All I'm saying is I want to just put it out there to offer a suggestion that perhaps your relationship with sugar is not the healthiest. Because if you tell an addict, like a coffee addict or a heroin addict or a gambling addict, saying you're going to stop tomorrow, they're going to be there, going to kill you, right? And if your relationship with sugar is on an addictive level and is really hard for you to think about, and instead you come and attack people like myself or other proponents of reduced sugar, then maybe that's on you and the sugar addiction you're experiencing, and not because what I'm saying makes no sense or is overly restrictive.
I mean, over years and years of doing different diets and not having sugar, it, like, once you have it, you try something, it tastes disgusting.
Yeah.
Sugar is disgusting.
Yes.
And I use like very small amount of maple syrup or coconut sugar in baked goods, but the more that you don't have it, the easier it is to just not crave it at all. And then once you do have a little bit, that's very sweet. Or if I make a smoothie with, the only fruit might be blueberries and some citrus, that to me is incredibly sweet, right? And blueberries are
Yeah.
not a very sweet fruit.
Yeah.
So gluten-free, dairy-free, corn-free, soy-free, sugar-free, maybe some,
Reduced, I would call it reduced sugar, at least in my
sugar,
world.
at
Yeah.
least have some, maybe some unrefined sweeteners, but get rid of cane sugar, and whole foods, and then protein, high protein, fat, fiber for breakfast. If you're going to have some fruit, have it in the afternoon, like in a smoothie as like a
Yes.
snack or something like that. Or so
Yeah.
I will often have a smoothie for lunch and put a bunch of protein powder in it. Anything else that I'm missing here?
No, I think you
Yeah.
did a wonderful job in encapsulating it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just a reminder that diet is that foundational piece for healing. If we want to shift anything in our body and allow this healing environment so any health condition can start to shift, we have to change our diet. And the more consistent you are with those changes, I think this is important, because once you get to that point of 4 to 6 weeks of some significant dietary change, that's when you start to be able to feel the difference. And when you can really crave the feeling of feeling good, all of the foods that you were addicted to, they just fall away. And it doesn't become, you're not like addicted to having that in your life anymore. You don't
Yeah.
even think about it.
People ask me often, like, do you not sometimes crave blah, 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 whatever, right? And I'm like, no, because it makes me feel like shit. So why would I? Like for 2 minutes of joy, I'm having like 2 days of like headache. Like, why? But I also want to say that, I think it takes time to get there. So just in full honesty, like, it took
Mm-hmm.
me a while to get there to this point. And, and no one should be beating themselves up for, like, if it's hard for you right now, especially if you have limited family support, this can be a transition. But here is a wonderful thing, it's that when you surround yourself with really healthy but also very tasty recipes, that's when a transition can become a lot easier. I think a lot of times people, I don't know whether it came from the hippie days of the 70s and 80s, of like healthy food was like a kale salad with like a drop, 2 drops of lemon juice on top, right? And that was healthy food. I think that's disgusting. That's horrible. And so you can do so much more with things. And that's what I think I'm so excited about you launching this podcast, Allie, is to show people and to show women who want to bring healthy food into their kitchens that, this woman who had this great podcast, this great website at one point, and I think it was called "He Doesn't Even Know It's Paleo" or something like that, right? And because the food was so amazing, like, the dude who's obviously not involved in the kitchen didn't even know it was, because it was so good. And I think this is where you're breaching the gap between just making food healthy and delicious, and not be like that little kale with this 2 drops of lemon juice.
Mm-hmm. And you'll become addicted to the feeling of feeling good from eating those foods. And eventually your brain correlates that. And so you start craving the exact food you need. And it does take time. That's the thing to remember. And we've been on this journey for a long time. I started doing dietary change in like 1999. So it's been a long process for me. And it's easy to stay in this framework that I have created. But if you're not there yet, just remember it's like one meal at a time. Just keep reaching for that path and keep, when you want to eat a bag of chips, well, choose a bunch of radishes and then you'll start to notice that feeling, right? Of feeling
Yeah, it's
energized.
did you, when you went to, I think we went to different nutrition schools, but one of the things that we were taught, which I think is a great concept, especially for someone who was not like ready to be going like, okay, that's it, I'm changing everything over, right? Which is, most people are not ready to do that. It's something called crowding out.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of be like, oh my God, this is like, I look at Allie's cookbook, I look at Magdalena's cookbook, all these things, like, like my cover, right? Pomegranates, and there's basil, and there's broccoli sprouts, and radishes. Look at that, Ellie, radishes, and it's all this, blah blah blah, right? And you're like, but I don't like, what one of the negative comments I have on my book, if any, on Amazon, is that I would use weird ingredients, and people will say like, oh, she uses like things like cardamom. I don't even know what that is, right? So if somebody is coming from maybe like limited culinary experience in the past, just is not ready to do like a huge transition, is the crowding out idea is to basically start incorporating, like, okay, instead of lettuce, I'm gonna do arugula from that point on. Okay, and then I'm gonna drop maybe carrots because they're quite high in sugar. So why don't I do radishes instead, right? And so you're beginning to like add on all these things that we're talking about here, and then you realize that after maybe 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, look back in it, and it's like it's so different. I crowded out all this, even the foods I'm giving example are not that bad. I'm talking about more like crowding out of all the processed foods, right? Like, packaged dinners that you pop into microwave, right? Like those are like really the things that we want to be avoiding. And I'm sure you teach about all of the stuff like batch cooking and freezing meals and optimizing it that way.
Yeah. So change takes time, and just keep on that process and just take it one step at a time. And all of a sudden you'll look back and you'll think, oh my gosh, a year from now, I've completely transformed, and you didn't even realize it. And then 2 years from now and 3 years from now, the transformations keep happening. So that's just, and just to have your North Star. I always tell people this, to create your North Star of what you imagine yourself to be. So if you imagine yourself to be cooking every meal from scratch, and to be including all of these beautiful cruciferous vegetables, and to have it be easy, then that's your North Star, right? And or maybe it's to be on a gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, corn-free diet for 6 months or something like that. And if you can keep holding that vision of yourself, eventually those pieces start to fall into place, and you don't even realize it's happening, but just to hold that vision of your North
I love
Star.
it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a wonderful podcast. I think it's going to help a lot of people understand what estrogen dominance is, and they can get your cookbooks. And do you have a website that people can learn more about you?
Yeah, so we have two websites. The educational website is called hormonesbalance.com, hormones with an S. And then Wellena, WELLENA.com is our, where the supplements are, but you're going to start off with diet. So if you're struggling with estrogen dominance, the book is Overcoming Estrogen Dominance. Is available on Amazon. And we have dedicated chapters for your do's and don'ts and add-ons for fibroids, breast health, breast cancer, period problems, hot flashes, thyroid nodules, endometriosis, miscarriages, cellulite, and stubborn hip fat. So, yeah. And what the book covers, which I don't think we have the time to cover today, which I think is also, I just want to put it out there because it's incomplete picture to talk about estrogen dominance, is also reducing those, what we call xenoestrogens, those external estrogens that are coming from our skincare products, cookware, your perfumes, your laundry detergents, and all that. And it might sound very overwhelming. If you're just beginning on this journey, just focus on the food element first, because once your liver and your gut is working better, then even detoxifications of those external estrogens becomes a lot easier. And then treat this as a sort of next project, next chapter, if you will, when you start reassessing what are the perfumes I'm using, your skincare product, your body lotion, and so on and so forth. The good news is that there's a lot available these days. It's really nice and clean. There's also a lot of greenwashing, so just to be really careful with that. The easiest thing I can say is this: like, instead of going by ingredient and brand, because brands also change, they get bought over by all the L'Oreals and Johnson and Johnson or whatever, and then they screw up they just change the formula without telling you. Is to walk into a health food store like a Co-op or whatever is near you. It's like a natural groceries that we have here, or and then look for and shop there, because the buyers there do a lot of the filtering for you to make sure that those nasties of the nastiest ingredients that are contributing towards estrogen dominance are not going to be part of those formulas, and they keep an eye on things a lot better than what you and I can do.
I think that's great. We didn't touch on that, but I think it's very important for people to get those toxic skincare products out and all of those xenoestrogens. I do have a recipe on my blog on nourishingmeals.com for a homemade body butter, which is really popular and people really like it. So that's
Nice.
something super simple you can make to put on your skin. Jojoba oil on your face. You can use essential oils. There's so much. And then we use Dr. Bronner's soap products. It's just so basic, so easy. So those are some simple changes you can make.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much, Magdalena. This was really informative. I'm so glad you were able to come on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for creating the awareness about estrogen dominance. As you can tell, like I'm very passionate about it. It's also, I feel like it's still very underserved side of
Mhm.
the, medicinal. Like a lot of, when you go and see a doctor, they'll tell you the most diagnosed hormonal imbalance in women is PCOS. I would argue that actually estrogen dominance is even worse. It's just that people just don't know about it. And I think PCOS is diagnosed because they have a medicine for it, like they want to put you on
Mhm.
metformin. so,
Mhm.
so there's a motive there. Hence, there is a diagnosis and actual a medical code for it. There is actually a medical code for estrogen dominance too. It's called hypoestrogenism. But it's just never used. And so I think it's very underserved. And the reason why I'm passionate about this is because Ali, when I promised myself when I started doing this work with estrogen dominance is that I selfishly did it for myself first because I didn't want to be a statistic in my family, and then I realized the resources are so limited for women around estrogen dominance. And I thought, what if I put this together so more women can really benefit from this? Because almost everybody has it these days, even young girls.
Yeah. And so if they can start shifting with removing a lot of these xenoestrogens, supporting liver health, supporting gut health, shifting diet at a young age, that's going to shift everything down the road for them. So that's
For
great.
sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.